Hello, and welcome to Optimistic Wargaming, where we try to remember the most important rule, which is to have fun. I'm Captain Optimism, and in this video, I will be going through all of the Age of Sigmar factions, so if you're thinking about getting into Sigmar and you just don't know what faction you want to play, I'll be going through them all with a brief lore summary, followed by how and what it's like to play them. So let's get started with all 24. Okay, 24 is a bit much for one video. So I'll be splitting this video up into a series, with each one focusing on a different Grand Alliance, starting with Grand Alliance Chaos. Chaos can generally be described as the big bad faction of Sigmar, with their followers being demons, mutants, and people who wouldn't look too out of place on the front of a heavy metal album cover. The forces of Chaos seek to create anarchy, corruption, and misrule, such that the dominion of Chaos can grow, granting the ancient gods of Chaos and their demons more power by claiming the souls of the mortals that worship them in desperation. In short, they're what happens when the folks get fed up with domestic life as it is and want to increase their power in ways they probably shouldn't and want to stick it to the man. Kind of like evil hippies, that are less about peace and more about sacrifices and murder. So, nothing like hippies at all, then. The Beasts of Chaos are a collection of wild animals mutated by the power of chaotic energies into a twisted fusion of man, beast, and monster, making them the true children of chaos. These creatures seek to destroy civilization in all its forms, getting uptight and angry at anything more civilized than two bricks being placed on top of each other, just like you when you hear the words pineapple on pizza. The Beasts of Chaos have an unusual roster that looks like a petting zoo from a Greek myth gone wrong, consisting of satyrs, no not that one, minotaurs, yes, pretty much exactly that one, but somehow hungrier, and what would happen if Shrek and Donkey switched roles. With these three making the core trio of creatures. But then Games Workshop realised they had a bunch of spare Chaos models, and crammed them in there, including chimeras, giants, and whatever the heck that thing is. So how do they play? Well, with the aforementioned three cores, each has its own specialty, namely speed, raw damage output, and durability, with the easiest to focus on and build being the Bray Herd. These goats can cross the board at a ridiculous pace, and pretty much all of them being able to run and act normally, as well as the ability to ride from ambush, meaning that combined with how they are cheap as chips, means you can completely dominate the board, able to reach out pretty much anywhere you want with the vast majority of your units. Just don't expect these goats to outfight anything tougher than clan rats in a fair fight. Leave that to the larger cousins. The Bulgur section is where the damage of the book exists, with the weapons having a ridiculously high range and damage. It's hard to believe that they're battle line. This is also where you have your highest damage monster, and ironically, your lowest output monster. They also have access to Bloodgreed, which when annihilating that unit you literally bull rushed, you eat the remains, which magically heals that massive stab wound they have. The only issue is that they're probably one of the swingiest units in the book, leading to some games where your herd of angry bulls completely misses that Death Star, or god that they looked tasty. Bad things will happen, more likely than not if you don't really hit them hard. Finally, the Thunderscorn, the smallest of these cores, with only having 2 actual units, but debatably the coolest. These dragon centaurs that eat lightning? Yeah, it's pretty cool. They are rather tanky, having dragon scales and an inbuilt healing ability, though their damage is less than you'd expect, although they do have the best hero in the book. However, the best part of the beasts is the giant rock that they inexplicably carry around to battles all the time. This giant rock has 3 main advantages. Firstly, it makes your collection of unruly animals ignore morale, which you would imagine would be the main weakness of wild animals. And you would be right, but that is a nice looking rock. Secondly, this monolith debuffs your opponent, reducing the saves of all their units that aren't beasts, meaning that when you actually want to do damage and you have to inevitably fight the enemy, you can actually have a pretty decent chance of wiping them out. And finally, the most powerful ability that the Herdstone gives you access to is summoning, where one of your heroes can throw their allies or even a bit of themselves onto the barbecue. And just like a real-life barbecue, all of your neighbours turn up unexpectedly, wondering what smells so good. You can summon almost anything in the book, and it's the best way to bring the more unusual animals in the book, in my opinion. Just expect your opponent to be really annoyed if you win the game due to summoning, even though everything in your book is just a worse version of their stuff for about the same points. Just make sure you bring a wizard though. Your spells are really good, and you do need someone to throw meat onto that fire. Finally, because other people will point it out in the comments if I don't mention them, the beasts have access to 3 optional sub-factions in the book called Great Phrase. These can be summarised as setting up massive speakers and a mic so more people know about your barbecue, a faction that consists of an entire army that took Shadow Step in as a spell in D&D, and finally, a tribe that worships Lovecraftian horrors over demons. Khorne, the Chaos God of Blood and War, considered the mightiest of the 4 gods of chaos. His worshippers are warriors, berserkers and barbarians, seeking to prove their might in battle, whilst the demons appear of beings of rage and might, seeking only blood. Khorne has a simple code: the blood must flow, regardless of the source, preferably the chaos of combat. The only exception to this creed is magic, which is despised by the Blood God, considering it cowardly and weak. The Blood God, it can be summarised by the battle cry of his followers: "Blood for the Blood God! Skulls for the Skull Throne!" Their playstyle is what you would expect from an army of warriors that worship a god of war, preferring to deal the enemy up close and personal, with most of their mortal units being able to fight as they die, and the demons having a large amount of mortal wound output. However, your main power comes from your heroes. These champions of the Blood God either dish out an insane amount of damage for their points, a really good buffing unit, or in some cases, both, creating an army that has a surprising amount of depth for a force that lore-wise doesn't really care much for strategy at all, despite being perfectly capable of it. This is then further complemented by the main mechanic of the faction, blood type points. This pool of points increases any time a unit dies in either yours or your opponent's army, as the Blood God cares not where it flows from. So, at the start of any of the hero phases, you can use these points to get an army award for that turn, such as saying no to those dirty wizards, getting free movement, fighting, or exploding damage output. Alternatively, you can use these points to summon more demons, which in turn, when they die or destroy enemies, give you more points. Just be careful when and how you spend them, as soon as you spend the points, your total goes back to 0, so you've got to work all the way back up. Like most factions, the Khorne Battle Tome does contain some sub-factions, 4 total, 2 each for each of the tribes and the demons. There are 2 that are all about killing enemies, enemy heroes, one for each, one for being spooky and scary, and then one that's all about objectives and board control. Tzeentch. Tzeentch? Tzeentch? However it's pronounced, is the chaos god of magic and change. Known as an inconsistent and manipulative god, Tzeentch is thought of to have knowledge of everything, past, present and future, and makes plans to manipulate the realms in its image. This god tends to be worshipped by wizards and mutants. Cults of change exist throughout the mortal realms, led by magisters, who manipulate and scheme, teaching magic to their followers just as often as they sacrifice them, until they have to enact their plans, years in the making. The demons of Tzeentch are creatures of pure magic and madness, never truly having a single form, though bird-like features are common. Just like Khorne, Tzeentch has 2 evenly split groups that you can mix and match. The Acolytes, who are the cult members and leaders, who when they are first indoctrinated are taught a spell that changes their appearance to whatever they want to choose to look like, which apparently means they all choose to look like this. The mortal servants also include the Zangors, who tend to be humans who have let Tzeentch have a little bit too much fun with their mutations. Alright, never mind, they went for the more reasonable option. The demons, on the other hand, are completely nuts, with vaguely humanoid gibbering messes, sentient fire, manta rays, and Big Bird if you took him into a house of mirrors with Vaseline smeared all over them. Strangely enough, as the followers of the god of magic, the army has a ridiculous amount of wizards, with your base troops being magic users, all of your heroes being wizards, and even the units who aren't wizards having some weird magical effect or special rule. You could also be considered the Chaos Shooty faction if it wasn't for one other contender. More on that later. With nearly every unit having some form of ranged weapon, which happens to be more magic. Noticing a theme yet? Of course, having beaten the first part of this god over the head with the subtlety bat, we have to apply the next part, which is the manipulation. This is represented by a destiny dice mechanic. Before the game begins, you roll 9 dice and put them to one side. At any time that you're asked to roll certain things, you can simply say, "Nah, thanks," and use one of the dice you put aside. Assuming, of course, you didn't accidentally roll them during the game and forget what you actually rolled. Strong as this sounds, do remember you still have to actually roll that dice at the start of the game, so if you happen to roll 9 2s at the start of the game, you've got my sympathy. But wait, I hear you cry, I want more magic mechanics! Well, Mr. Potter, do I have news for you, as you also have a summoning mechanic, just like nearly every Chaos faction. Don't worry though, yours will usually be forgotten. Every time you or your opponent casts a spell, and it's successful, you get a point. That doesn't seem so bad. I have loads of wizards. Well, my friend, to summon the lowest thing on that list, you need 10 whole points, which you'll be lucky to get in about 2 turns, unless you're playing a ridiculously large game. So don't worry about it too much. Finally, as per usual, those are the obligatory side factions. You have 6 of them. 3 for the mortals and 3 for the demons. 2 of them if you want to be a pyromaniac, 1 if you want to trick your opponent, 1 if you're really hungry for magic, 1 if you're a furry, and finally, Sesame Street, the cult. The standard Chaos faction, if such a thing exists. These are the mortal servants of the dark gods who seek the favour and attention of the entire pantheon. These warrior tribes, cults, and sects of knights are led by mighty champions who care not for the fate of their supplicants, and instead lead them on to follow a path to glory, where 3 such fates are possible: death, damnation, or immortality. The Slaves' Darkness are a force that can be built and played in multiple different ways, able to be ran as a big immovable wall of iron and steel, hordes of lightly armoured barbarians, pure cavalry, either heavy or skirmish variants, as well as pure chariot builds are all possible in any combination. After all, anything is possible under the 8-pointed star of Chaos. Of course, it's not all about the legions of faceless dudes. It's all about your characters and their journey. And oh boy do the Chaos Gods have a ton to choose from. Chieftains, sorcerers and mighty knights, usually all very reliable, but they are also the source of your army's abilities, providing buffs to all of your followers, assuming they all follow the same religion, buffs that can buff your dudes to an insane level of damage output, but most importantly, your heroes can roll on the Eye of the Gods table, where every time you kill an enemy hero or big beastie, the gods reward you with a random buff. Watch as your heroes, who you have definitely named because you're an adult and name your plastic toy soldiers, are adorned with mutations such as immunity to pain, extra arms, immortality, or just become a giant pile of tentacles. But where the Slaves of Darkness differ is that their sub-factions are actually compulsory rather than optional. You have to take them, but they all have some different themes. You have the Ravagers, who can buff your heroes, who have even more buffed heroes rather than just giving your general special ability, as well as being able to call more dudes to the fight, because, Chaos doesn't have enough armies that can summon. The Kabbalists, who allow their wizards to sacrifice their friends to cast more magic. You have the Despoilers, who allow you to have regenerating monsters, as well as an ability you will never use ever in your games. And finally, the Everchosen, for when you don't want any friends, hate painting lots of models, and have absolutely no issue with Games Workshop's individual model price. Slaanesh, the Chaos God of pain and excess, the youngest of the 4 Chaos Gods, and often the one that is left out when the other gods want to plan something, due to him taking things just a little bit too far often. Lore-wise, Slaanesh has been missing trapped between two realms after having gorged on just one too many elf souls at a buffet, and falling into a food coma. This god has been imprisoned and treated like a soul vending machine, throwing out elven souls for the elven pantheon to utilise. This has ended up splitting the followers of the cruel god into three groups. Those who are actually trying to find the being and somehow haven't thought of looking at the one place they haven't actually been to yet. Those who are trying to take advantage of the power vacuum that the absence of a god inevitably creates, because I'm sure that won't go badly. And finally, those who just don't care at all, just want to keep on partying. The Chaos faction with the least variety, with the book being almost exclusively demons, who appear sort of human except with giant crab claws, insectoid eyes, and hair so big that they look like 80s rock guitarists. They're also the spikiest Chaos faction, which is certainly saying something, full of chariots that look like it would be an insanely bumpy ride, but, maybe they enjoy that, who knows. Gameplay-wise, well, you're fast. Insanely so. You want to cross the board in one turn? Slaanesh can probably do that. Debatably the fastest army in the game, although there are some exceptions. You will also want a lot of dice. Normally I wouldn't mention this. This is a Warhammer game. Lots of dice is normal. But combining your ability to fight multiple times, high base attack stats, and exploding dice, you often end up in a situation where you quickly discover if you have large shovel hands or not. However, this army is the very definition of a glass hammer. You hit very hard, but if most things look at you funny, then you evaporate faster than a glass of water in the middle of the Sahara. This weakness, though, is overshadowed by two major mechanics. Firstly, your heroes are excellent dancers. This means that if they're in combat, they can bust a move, and suddenly your opponents forget to fight, making them strike last. So more likely than not, you've got a decent chance of fighting first everywhere across the board. On top of that, you can have your cake and eat it too, with your weakness becoming a strength, utilising your Chaos Summoning mechanic guarantee. You get points whenever things get hurt and not killed. This means that even as you take damage, you get more demons, and when you inflict damage, you also gain more demons, leading to a very awkward position for your opponent, as all of your opponent's actions benefit you, as do all of yours, to the point where even post-nerf, it's debatably one of the strongest summoning mechanics in the game. Guess what? You also have sub-factions in your book. Last ones in this video, I swear. But again, they're mandatory, just like the Slaves of Darkness. One allows you to take 3 fancy leaders instead of 1, but they get jealous whenever Senpai puts them all next to each other. One is about having one fabulous uber leader who is oh so perfect, and all of their cheerleader friends who hype them up. And the final one makes you go even faster, just in case you thought this army was going just a bit too slow. Also, as one last thing on Slaanesh, has anyone else noticed that Slaanesh and Sonic the Hedgehog are very similar? They're fast, spiky, and has a fandom that's obsessive and draws art you probably shouldn't Google. Just a thing that I've never really seen talked about. Well, now that we have the awkward Chaos God done, we can move on. Next, we have Nurgle, the Chaos God of decay, famine, and pestilence. Oh. Nurgle is known as the oldest and most generous god, more than willing to provide his gifts and blessings and hugs to anyone and everyone, even if they're unwanted, just like those socks you got last Christmas. His followers tend to be bloated and physically repulsive, full of disease and pus, and all but immune to pain, protected from the lethal part of the disease that they carry by their god. His demons are very similar, usually cyclopean and with a single horn. Flies will often accompany these armies, creating a droning sound effect alongside all of the bells that they tend to carry. The Maggotkin force is again split between demons and mortals, however, they play in a very similar role. The force is slow-moving, but almost unstoppable, with the basic Rotbringer infantry being as tough, if not tougher than most other armies' heroes, whilst the demons have a bit less durability, but have far greater numbers. The force also has a large amount of healing availability, with even the basic units having some inbuilt healing mechanic. This, alongside strong weaponry, makes the Maggotkin the ultimate attrition faction for Chaos. However, when I say slow, I mean slow. With some of the units moving at a snail's pace quite literally. You really do need to deploy smartly, as an out-of-place unit is likely to never get where you need it to be. Nurgle is also a huge fan of the Lion King, and as a result sings about the circle of life all the time, creating your main army mechanic around this. This wheel starts at a random location, but is predictable once the game begins, buffing all your Nurgle units while debuffing any non-Nurgle units. This leads to an awkward mirror matchup though, where you actually end up buffing each other's armies. It's a bit weird. Of course, this would not be a Chaos faction without summoning of some description, but the followers of Nurgle have an unusual choice. You see, at the start of the game, you can plant a tree. This tree, as well as conquering sections of the board, provides you with your points. These points can be used to summon things, but as well as the traditional demons we all know and love, they can be used to summon another tree. These trees can not only provide you points later on, but can make your army move faster, leading to an interesting choice of, do you invest your points now and make more points later on, or do you cash out quickly and just summon demons from the start? The Skaven are a race of rat-like humanoids that seek to take over the world. They are individually weak, cowardly, and treacherous, though collectively vicious and cruel. Skaven society is dominated by the desire and desperation to climb the ladder of power, happily betraying and sabotaging anyone and anything to get even the slightest increase in power. This makes the Skaven exceptionally paranoid and innovative. The Skaven worship a god that's known as the Great Horned Rat, who is the 5th Chaos God, despite the other Chaos Gods stating that only 4 exists, though technically loads of minor ones are available. However, the sheer amount of worshippers of this being have led to it having an increased amount of power, to the point where even the other members of the Pantheon at least have to acknowledge its presence. While Skaven all have these traits, their society is split into different clans. These clans are all fierce rivals with one another, each seeking to gain further power, and even pacts and alliances will often break, faster than a Kit Kat when you're feeling peckish. There are 4 major clans with significant weight behind them, these known as the Great Clans. These clans can be found everywhere, and are often found to have some form of representation even in the smaller clans. These Great Clans are as follows: Pestilence, who are Nurgle cosplaying priests, who are less about hugs and more about the destruction, creating great plagues to destroy the realms. Scryer, who are deranged inventors, creating hamster wheels of doom, Gatling guns, and cannons. Moulder, who are Dr. Frankenstein and his monsters, creating horrifying abominations that require a lot of feeding. And Eshin, who are an entire force of master splinters, assassinating and backstabbing their rivals, whilst keeping a ninja aesthetic. As well as these great clans, there is a group known as the Master Clan. These are the mages of Skaven society, who have the largest amount of influence and power, technically able to claim dominion of any clan they wish. Despite this though, even they are not above the power struggles and betrayal, with more than one having found their end at the hands of those that they rule. Gameplay-wise, the Skaven are similar to the Beasts of Chaos and Slaves to Darkness, in that you can build your army in multiple different ways, with different playstyles, without any repercussions. As the different clans are not sub-factions, and are simply ways that you can play, potentially going full in, or just dipping your toe in if you wish. The central core of the Skaven is the hordes of basic rats, known as the Vermintide. As Skaven, you generally want to play as hordes, getting huge bonuses the more dudes are in your squads, supported by heroes that actively try to avoid being on the front lines, overwhelming your opponent in bodies as you yourself lose a handful of models. From there, you can specialise through the different clans. Clan Pestilence takes the horde idea and takes it to an extreme, having lots of attacks, low saves, and characters that can buff your units to an absurd amount of attacks and damage. Eshin are excellent character killers. They are fast, able to hide units, redeploy, and generally be a nuisance. Moulder could be considered the elite Skaven group, bringing large, somewhat durable bricks of ogres and a literal abomination to the field. These are also your melee line breakers, punching a hole through your opponent's defence and allowing your hordes to pour through. Finally, Scryer are the clan that makes the Skaven the other claimant to be the shooty faction, able to shoot from across the board with extremely high damage output models. But this weaponry is temperamental at best, being just as likely to kill themselves as they are your opponents, with every unit in the roster being able to inflict damage on themselves. Overall, the Skaven are a force that's all about damage. In your average games, there will be likely not much left on the board at all, with both your stuff and your opponents destroyed. All the while, you cackle maniacally as your followers die in droves, all for that power fantasy of you to rise through the ranks. Just be sure to bring lots of dice, and maybe invest in some movement traits. Trust me, in their case, it's probably worth it. And that's it. That's all the core Chaos factions. Thank you for listening, and I hope this helps you decide on a faction. If you have any further questions about anything, just let me know. Until next time, stay optimistic, and most importantly, stay safe. Bye for now.